If you're a photographer, you should absolutely be concerned about AI. If you guys have followed me for very long, all the way back to the pro photo show days in the mid to late 2000s, when the transition to digital was happening, you know that we talked about this same thing. The move to AI, I think, is going to be very much like the move from film to digital. I'm here for positivity today, not for negativity, however. And I think there's going to be a huge side effect of this AI stuff that no one is talking about. And I'm going to show you that today. I, of course, have played around with this stuff a bit, and I even went to DALL-E and started putting in prompts and things like that. And the results are mostly very illustrative. Some of them are quite remarkable and accurate to their locations. I even fed DALL-E a few of my images to see what it would do if I gave it the opportunity to plagiarize me. And guess what? It still didn't look anything like a photo. Obviously, the scene and the composition of my original here of Thor as well is very well duplicated, but everything else is kind of this AI representation. As you see in most of these, while they could easily be a painting, when you really get into them, they don't look like a photograph. And something like this with faces, it's a little more difficult. They actually look, well, very AI. Now, the first thing somebody's going to say is, Gavin, that's going to change fast. And you're right. The speed at which these things have been moving, chatbots and image generators, has been flying. Now, that pace may not continue, as usually these things tend to slow down once they hit a certain critical point. However, there's no question that these AI tools are going to be used for things like stock photography and imagery for blogs and publishing and even video. So yes, as image makers, that is absolutely going to affect our job. Just like it was unrealistic in the early 2000s for film studio photographers who were selling 8x10s all day long to say, no, digital's not going to affect us, when just a few years later, anyone with a cell phone could take an amazing photo and have it printed on an 8x10. And the photographers that couldn't or didn't adapt to that, they fell. And a lot of those were great photographers and great people, and it was hard to watch. And AI is going to do that again. But innovation has done that all through history. If you've been a photographer for any time that knows about actually taking photos in the field, you've probably been out browsing and seeing like huge moon photos or these ridiculously perfect landscapes or unreal scenes on Instagram, for example. And if you're like me, you've probably also been frustrated as all these comments are like, amazing capture. How did you do that? And you're sitting there going like this and saying, he didn't do it. It's not real. It was done in Photoshop. Now, it's not bad to create digital art. It can be beautiful, but it's a little frustrating for those of us who go out and take landscape photos and work hard creating scenes that represent the real world and the way we see the real world. And we're competing with scenes that are literally not real at all, but the image maker is trying to subconsciously lie to people. Fake moon photos abound. On the other hand, you may sometimes find moon photos that were taken through very long lenses and using perspective control and things like that to make the moon huge in relation to the subject, and they are real, or at least they look real. They suspend your disbelief. With AI, however, the critical thinking is about to get way higher. People have become more and more cynical, far more than they were 40 years ago with film, even though there were ways to retouch and fake photos then too, but it was a lot more work. And what's going to happen with AI is that cynicism is going to go threefold. Because once AI is ultra refined, there can be complete fakery everywhere that looks perfect and natural and photorealistic. Not even getting into the plagiarism aspects of AI and where it's taking all these concepts and ideas and images from, what I think we're going to see is actually a resurgence of real photography. We've already seen this start with the rise of film photography. I'm sorry, can someone tell me how I enable skin smoothing on the 500C? I was started in the film days, and then I went digital, and then I came back to film, and I learned a lot from it. A lot of people now that are photographers never touched a film camera, and now they're discovering film. The prices of film are skyrocketing, but the ideas of film emulsions in cameras, in video processing, in using real film, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's why I invest so much in my Filmist project, my Filmist presets, my Filmist LUTs, and getting those accurate, because I want to preserve the beauty that that film taught us and the nuance. Digital came along, we could do crazy editing things, and we could over-edit so easy that we started to lose the suspension of disbelief, which is people seeing something that's flawless and perfect, and they, in their mind, believe it's real. People started to become critical because our editing could go so far in Photoshop and with colors and all of these things. When you return to film, it kind of makes you think simple. It makes you focus on the frame and on the creation of the image. When you edit with film-like looks, it allows you to have a baseline, a reference point. Just look at a couple of these scans that I did from actual 4x5 film, and you're gonna notice a pattern in their aesthetic. There's a distinct level of imperfection in these. And even though the quality of these is amazing, this nearly 200 megapixel scan from a 4x5 slide film has a tremendous amount of detail, even unedited, like it is right here. As soon as you switch to a digital image, it's beautiful, but there is something different. The film image has something organic about it. There is something imperfect. In fact, the main cam right now that you're watching me on is my Sony with a vintage Canon FE 50mm 1.4, because it gives me a very good aesthetic. It gives me that softness in the background. If I switch to this 16mm Fuji lens over here that's much newer, you can see that it's very different. It's a great lens. It gives me a fun perspective, all of that. But the very aesthetic of it is distinctly different from this vintage lens. The human desire for things that are authentic, for that baseline of things that are real and that are of quality, is why I think the suspension of disbelief meter is about to shift substantially. And in street photography, what I've learned is that taking ordinary scenes and conveying them in the way that they're magical to you is important. And so the light and getting it right in camera matters a lot, but the edit is very, very important. The way you use the shadows, the way you mix those with light, the way you blend the colors. That's why a lot of street type photographers love using film, because there's a gritty rawness to it. There's an imperfection to it. If I take a look at a simple photo like this taken in Huichapan, Hidalgo, and I come in here, it's a very normal image. I could adjust colors and things like that, but it's really nothing that crazy, and it's a little boring. Yet when I was standing there, there was something a little special about it. And when I look at the raw image, I don't feel like that's really conveyed. What does that mean to me as an editor? Does it mean the light was bad? No, the light's actually pretty good. It kind of conveys what I'm trying to convey about this city in Mexico and just normal things going on the street. It's not a terribly exciting image, but wait. As a street photographer, it's my job to use the light and the tools I have available to convey that feeling. That's why photographers love vintage lenses and film-like looks. It's not that it's some fad. It actually speaks to us at the level that an image resonates in people's minds. The almost near perfection that digital has come to actually gets to a point where it's too much. It's too the same. Have you ever noticed that when people shoot film and they blog about it and they make YouTube videos out of it, there's something magical about even normal everyday things, not even always taken in the greatest light, but composed well, planned well. It's almost like you're feeling the emotion of the person that took the frame. As an editor and as someone who's always creating recipes and tools, that's what I'm hunting. I've been doing that a lot in my recent street collection that I'm working on. If I take a preset like my Street Air preset and maybe just turn it down a little bit, now this color is more representative of what my eyes were seeing. If I go to something like Filmist and use Ektar, and then I can use the settings and turn it up or down, the aesthetic of the image becomes a little rougher. There's grain, there's texture, there's detail. It honestly feels more worse. Is that a word? I don't think that more worse is a word. It feels like a less perfect image, but because of that, it resonates more with me. I often use simple images like this for color testing. And you can see if I go to something like Portra 160, by the way, you can get my Portra 160 film-like preset on my site for free over at seimfx.com. I'll put a link down below, as well as classic neg-like. So go play with these. You're gonna see a pattern, however, and that's what I'm gonna show you as one of the secrets. If you look at how Portra takes this and the brighter colors that are more true to life and actually makes them a little more subdued. And then you could say, well, let's turn down the blacks. Let's turn down the exposure. I actually want to not have too much shadow and highlight, right? I want it to feel a little rougher. And to do that, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a little more grain. See what's happening there? We've taken something like this, where for years we've been trying to get rid of all the noise in our images and get them super clean like they now come to us out of the camera. But what we lost along the way is that organic feel of something that was from the real world, something that was made of crystals and silver. How I make film presets, everyone is specifically different, but you'll find some patterns like the greens not being overdriven in the saturation, the reds being rich. Oftentimes in films, you'll see the blues are actually leaning a little more cyan. If you go to the hues, you can see in Portrait, my blues lean a little bit cyan to represent what the original film had. Now you can go extremes on this, and maybe you will sometimes. I didn't go that extreme, but that subtle difference in those blues, which usually come across very straightforward in digital, when you switch it to here, it's now the color of blues that's like Portrait 160. This same principle rings true when I'm shooting and I'm in the camera. Even if I'm not using a vintage lens, maybe I'm out with my X100, but I actually find myself moving the camera to get some lens flares, to get some lack of fidelity in certain areas so that it can be drawn more to my subject. And then coming back and saying, hey, I want something that's like classic chrome. I want something like classic neg. I want something like Natura or Ektar, because it gives me an aesthetic a little bit less artificial. I'm not saying you should go out and start stocking up on real film. What I'm saying is that while shooting film is a phenomenal experience, it's probably still going to keep increasing in price for the foreseeable future. The concepts that we learned from shooting with film cameras, from the nuances and colors of film, the subtlety of film, and the imperfections of film, of vintage lenses, if you think about that in how you edit photos, it's actually a very transformative thing. Film images that I took, there's a very organic, real feel to them. They don't feel faked and manipulated, even though there's some imperfections. Obviously, I could clean up the dust bits from my scan. You don't need to leave those imperfections there. This need for things real and authentic feeling in a world where everything is becoming more and more artificial is so true that you're starting to see people going back to old digital cameras that we moved on from years ago because they want the rougher, older feel of those sensors that feels more organic. If you look at some of my early wedding photos from like a 5D Mark II, which at the time was the pinnacle of technology, you can see that even at its pure raw state, there's a lot more noise, there's a lot more artifacting going on. Some of my early long exposure work, like 140 minutes of night, was a nightmare to edit because there were so many artifacts in the frame that I was fighting with from that long exposure. That's why people are even picking up older digital cameras, because they like the aesthetic that they produce. And when I combine that with something like Portrait, like Ektar, now I'm getting this even more authentic, organic look. I don't want you to mistake what I'm saying here for some weird hipster thing where we have to be vintage. AI is coming. People are going to lose jobs for it, but there's also going to be a lot of opportunity in it. And from image making perspective, I think there's a strong possibility that the value of real handmade photographs that are authentic, that aren't completely manipulated, and that represent something real, a person, a place, a thing, are going to become more valuable to people in a world where everything is just faked, where the advertising they see is created by AI, where elements all over their movies are fake and artificial, maybe even to a point where actors' authenticity is important to human beings. Brands sell authenticity. People sell authenticity. When you can create authenticity that's real, not faked by an AI, not generated by a copywriter AI, but that's actually communicating with people like you and I in the real world, AI is going to increase the value of that. This is real. It wasn't created by a hyper supercomputer AI. You don't want to be waiting to think about, are you just over editing? Because what's going to go first is the hyper over edited images, because AI will be able to create those like snap. But real world authenticity in our photos, from the streets, from the weddings, from the events, that's always going to be something that we want to represent real moments in our lives. And that's something that as photographers, we were always supposed to be seeking out. I hope I'm conveying myself well in this. Maybe we'll do a deeper video on how much AI can do and what we should do. I am going to learn how the AI works and use it when it's beneficial. But in a world of AI, I'm going to be looking to make my images more real and more authentic, because the suspension of disbelief, making people believe that what you create is real and not just faked in 10 seconds by an AI, is about to get way harder. Let me know what you think in the comments. And we'll see you next time. And I'll put the link to some of these free film formulas, because even if you don't use my Filmist pack, you definitely don't want to be ignoring these kind of nuances in how you create your images.